Jake Mitchell had been cleaning floors and fixing broken equipment on Harmony Point Station for 3 years now. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent and gave him access to parts of the station most humans never got to see. The diplomatic wing was his favorite assignment. Quiet. Clean. No drunk spacers causing trouble like down in the commerce levels. Today he was working in the Valerian Embassy gardens. The Valorians were particular about their plants, always wanting everything trimmed just right. Jake didn't mind. There was something peaceful about working with growing things, even alien ones. The purple vines they grew reminded him of wisteria back on Earth, though these ones glowed faintly at night. He was on his knees, cutting back an overgrown section near the east wall, when his pruning tool hit something solid. The metallic clang echoed through the quiet garden. Jake frowned and pulled back more vines. His tool had scraped paint off something underneath. Something that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. It was a door. A human door. Jake sat back on his heels and stared. The Valorians had built this section of the embassy 50 years ago. Everything was their design, their materials, their aesthetic. So why was there a human door buried under their garden? He cleared away more growth, his heart beating faster. The door was old, really old. The metal had that worn look that came from centuries of exposure. But the markings were still readable. Jake traced his fingers over the letters stamped into the surface. New Horizon. Deck 7. Emergency access. The pruning tool slipped from Jake's hand and clattered on the stone pathway. Everyone knew about the New Horizon. It was one of those stories that stuck with you from childhood. 800 colonists set out for a new world in 2247 and just vanished. No distress signal. No debris field. No trace. One of the great unsolved mysteries of early human space exploration. Jake pulled out his handheld and took pictures from every angle. His hands were shaking slightly. This didn't make sense. The New Horizon disappeared 300 years ago. This part of Harmony Point was only 50 years old. How did a door from that ship end up here? He sent the photos to station security with a brief explanation. Then he sat down on a nearby bench and waited, staring at the door. 20 minutes passed. Then his handheld buzzed with a reply. Old scrap metal. Valorians probably salvaged it and used it in construction. These species love collecting artifacts from other cultures. Don't worry about it. Just finish your shift. Jake read the message 3 times. It made sense, he supposed. Plenty of species collected human memorabilia. But something felt wrong. The door wasn't decorative. It was functional, complete with a sophisticated locking mechanism. And it wasn't mounted on a wall as decoration. It was installed. Set into the ground like it led somewhere. He looked around the empty garden. Ambassador Veland's office windows overlooked this area, but they were dark. Most of the embassy staff had left for the day. Jake was alone with his thoughts and a door that shouldn't exist. His shift ended at 2000 hours. Jake packed up his equipment slowly, glancing back at the door every few minutes. He'd covered it again with vines, making it look undisturbed. But he couldn't stop thinking about it. At home in his small quarters, Jake couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, running through possibilities. Maybe security was right. Maybe it was just salvage. But the New Horizon had been a colony ship carrying nearly 1,000 people. Families. Children. They'd been traveling to set up a new world. When they vanished, it had shaken humanity's confidence in deep space travel for decades. And now part of their ship was buried in an alien garden on a space station. Jake rolled over and checked the time. 0200 hours. His next shift started at 1400. He could get a few hours of sleep. Should get some sleep. Instead, he got dressed and grabbed his toolbox. The diplomatic wing was quiet at night. Jake's access badge got him through the checkpoints without issue. Maintenance staff could go almost anywhere. One of the perks of being invisible. The garden was dark except for the soft glow of the alien vines. Jake knelt beside the door and pulled back the growth he'd carefully replaced hours earlier. He set up a small work light and examined the locking mechanism. It was sophisticated. More complex than anything humans had used 300 years ago. That was interesting. Colony ships from that era had simple mechanical locks. This one had electronic components, some of them clearly added later. Jake opened his toolbox and got to work. He told himself he'd just take a quick look. See if the door actually opened. Satisfy his curiosity. Then he'd report it properly and let someone else figure out what it meant. But deep down he knew he was lying to himself. Something about this felt important. Felt like it mattered. And Jake had learned a long time ago to trust his instincts. The lock fought him for almost an hour before something clicked. Then the door shuddered. Jake heard a hiss of equalizing pressure, and the heavy panel lifted slightly on pneumatic hinges. He grabbed his light and pulled the door fully open. Stairs led down into darkness. Cold air rushed up from below, carrying a stale mechanical smell. Jake pointed his light down and saw walls lined with panels covered in human text and warning labels. This wasn't just a door. This was an entrance to something bigger. Something that went deep below the station's official lower levels. Jake checked his handheld. Still no signal from security. No one knew he was here. Smart people would close the door and call for help. Smart people would follow proper procedures. But Jake thought about 800 people who disappeared 3 centuries ago. People who'd had families waiting for news that never came. And he started down the stairs. The stairs went down much farther than Jake expected. His work light bounced off smooth walls that looked nothing like the Valerian construction above. These walls were human-made, no question about it. Every 10 steps he passed emergency lighting panels that were dark and dead. The air grew colder with each step. After what felt like 5 stories down, the stairwell opened into a corridor. Jake stopped and swept his light around. The hallway stretched in both directions, lined with more human panels and equipment. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, untouched for who knew how long. He chose left and started walking. The silence was complete except for his footsteps. His breathing sounded loud in his own ears. Jake's handheld still showed no signal. He was too far underground. If something happened down here, no one would know where to find him. Smart Jake would turn around. Smart Jake would go back up and call this in properly. But Smart Jake wasn't the one walking through this corridor. Curious Jake was in control now. The hallway ended at a large door. This one had a viewing window. Jake wiped away decades of grime and pressed his face to the glass. His light revealed a massive chamber beyond. Rows and rows of cylindrical pods, each about 7 feet tall. They filled the room like soldiers standing at attention. Cryogenic pods. Jake's mouth went dry. He'd seen pictures of old cryo units in history classes. These matched the models used on colony ships in the mid-22nd century. The same era as the New Horizon. He tried the door. Locked. But this mechanism was simpler than the one above. Jake worked on it with tools from his belt, his hands steadier now despite his racing heart. Something had shifted in his mind. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was important. This was something people needed to know about. The lock clicked open after 20 minutes. Jake pulled the door wide and stepped into the chamber. The temperature dropped immediately. His breath fogged in the air. The room was climate-controlled, still running after all this time. Emergency power, maybe. Or something more deliberate. Jake approached the nearest pod. A status panel glowed on its side, faint green lights pulsing in a steady rhythm. His fingers trembled as he wiped the frost from the pod's viewing port. A face looked back at him. A woman middle-aged, eyes closed. Sleeping. She wore clothes from centuries ago, the kind you saw in old photographs. Her skin had that waxy appearance of someone in deep cryo-sleep. The status panel read, occupied. Stable. Life signs normal. Jake stumbled backward. His light swept across the chamber, illuminating row after row of pods. All of them showed the same green status lights. All of them occupied. He moved through the rows like a man in a dream, checking pod after pod. Men, women, different ages. All sleeping. All alive. The panels showed names and identification numbers. Bennett Thomas. Rodriguez Angela. Patterson James. Names from another century. Jake counted as he walked. 50 pods. 70. 100. More. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. These weren't just bodies preserved for study. These were people. Living people. Kept in suspension for 300 years. He found a terminal station against the far wall and managed to power it on. The screen flickered to life, showing system diagnostics and operational logs. Jake's background was maintenance, not computers, but he could navigate basic systems. He started pulling up files, his eyes scanning faster and faster. The logs went back centuries. Maintenance records. Power consumption reports. Status checks on the cryogenic systems. Someone had been monitoring this place. Recently. The last systems check was dated 3 weeks ago. Jake dug deeper and found older files. Mission reports. First contact logs. His stomach turned as he read. The New Horizon hadn't vanished in an accident. They'd encountered the Valorians during their journey. This was first contact back when humanity was barely starting to explore beyond its own solar system. The Valorians had intercepted the colony ship. According to the reports, the Valerian leadership at the time had deemed humanity, insufficiently advanced for galactic integration. There were debates about whether to send the colonists back to Earth or proceed with what they called protective custody. Protective custody 1. 800 people had been brought to what would eventually become Harmony Point Station. Most had been sent back to Earth in their ship with their memories altered, told they'd experienced equipment failures and needed to return home. But over 100 others had been selected for something else. The reports called it biological preservation. Kept in stasis until humanity matured sufficiently for proper contact. Then they'd been forgotten. Jake read about budget cuts to the program. Staff reassignments. The facility being sealed and built over as the station expanded. The colonists became a footnote in old files that nobody bothered to check anymore. Except someone had been checking. Those recent maintenance logs meant someone knew these people were down here. A sound from above made Jake freeze. Footsteps on the stairs. He dimmed his light and moved behind a row of pods, his heart hammering. The chamber door opened. A figure entered, tall and thin. The emergency lights Jake's presence had activated showed gray skin and the distinctive features of a Valerian. Ambassador Velan. Jake held his breath as the ambassador walked slowly through the chamber, stopping at several pods. The old alien placed a hand gently on one unit, his expression sad. "I know you are here, Jake Mitchell," Velan said quietly. "Your security badge registered when you entered the garden tonight." Jake stepped out from his hiding place. "You knew about this?" "About them." Velan turned to face him. "Yes. I have known for 20 years. Since I was assigned to this embassy." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Jake's voice came out harder than he intended. "Because I am a coward," Velan said simply. "Speaking openly would have meant exile from my people. Imprisonment perhaps. So I did what little I could. I made sure the power systems were maintained. I kept the garden thick with vines over the entrance. And I waited. Waited for what? For someone to find them. Someone with the courage I lacked." Velan looked at the sleeping faces in their pods. 300 years they have waited. That is long enough. Jake pulled out his handheld. "I'm calling this in. Medical teams, security, everyone." Velan nodded slowly. "Yes, that is what must happen now. But please, Jake Mitchell, send your reports to many departments at once. If you send to only one, there are those who will try to keep this quiet. Make it impossible for them to hide." Jake stared at the ambassador. "You're helping me. I am trying to do the right thing finally. Even if it costs me everything." Velan moved toward the door. "I will return to my office. When security arrives, I will cooperate fully. This secret has lived too long in darkness." The ambassador left, and Jake was alone again with the sleeping colonists. He looked at his handheld, then at the rows of pods. 127 people. 127 lives put on hold. He started typing messages to every department and authority he could think of, attaching photos and data from the terminal. Within minutes, his handheld exploded with incoming calls and messages. He ignored them all and kept sending evidence. Whatever happened next, these people deserved to be found. They deserved to wake up. Even if the world they woke to was nothing like the one they'd left behind. The chamber filled with people within an hour. Medical teams in white suits rushed between the pods with scanning equipment. Security officers cordoned off the area. Station administrators stood in clusters, speaking in hushed, urgent voices. Jake sat on an equipment crate near the wall, watching it all happen, still trying to process everything. Dr. Helen Torres, the station's chief medical officer, approached him with a tablet in her hands. She was a stern woman in her 50s who didn't waste words. "You found them. You opened the first door?" Jake nodded. "I'm sorry. I know I should have waited for authorization, but..." "You did the right thing," Helen cut him off. "If you'd gone through proper channels, this might have been buried again. Some people are very good at making inconvenient discoveries disappear." She glanced at a group of Valerian officials talking near the entrance. "We're going to start revival procedures. One at a time. Slowly. Their bodies have been in stasis for 3 centuries. We need to be careful." "Will they be okay?" Jake asked. Helen's expression softened slightly. "Physically? The cryosystems kept them stable. They should be fine. But mentally?" She shook her head. "How do you tell someone they've lost 300 years? That everyone they knew is dead? We have psychologists standing by, but honestly, we're in uncharted territory here." Jake watched the medical teams prepping the first pod. "Which one are they waking first?" "Rebecca Hall. She was the chief engineer on the New Horizon. According to the ship's manifest, she was the ranking crew member among those brought here. We figured she'd want to know first." Want to be the one to help us wake the others. The process took over 2 hours. Jake watched as they slowly raised the pod's temperature, administered medications, and carefully monitored every vital sign. Rebecca Hall's body started to move. Small twitches at first, then deeper movements. Her eyes fluttered. The medical team stepped back as her eyes opened fully. She stared at the ceiling, confused. Then she turned her head and saw all the people, the equipment, the aliens standing in the background. Helen moved close to the pod as it opened completely. Rebecca Hall? My name is Dr. Helen Torres. You're safe. You're on a space station called Harmony Point. Do you remember going into cryo-sleep? Rebecca's voice came out rough and dry. The Valorians. They said it was temporary. Protective custody. They said humanity wasn't ready yet. She tried to sit up and Helen helped her. How long has it been? Weeks? Months? Helen's face was carefully neutral. It's been longer than that. I need you to prepare yourself for some difficult news. How long? Rebecca's voice got stronger, more insistent. 300 years, Helen said quietly. It's the year 2547. Rebecca stared at her. The color drained from her face. That's not possible. You're lying. This is some kind of... I'm not lying, Helen said gently. I'm very sorry. But you've been in stasis for 3 centuries. Rebecca looked around the chamber at all the other pods. The others? How many? 127 including you. All in stable condition. The rest of the crew? The colonists who were sent back to Earth in the ship. Helen checked her tablet. According to records, they made it home safely. Their descendants are living throughout human space now. Rebecca put her head in her hands. Her shoulders shook. Helen signaled for the medical team to give them space but stay close. Jake felt like he was intruding on something too private, too painful to witness. But he couldn't look away. After several minutes, Rebecca looked up. Her eyes were red but she'd stopped crying. I need to see the data. I need to understand what happened to us. Helen handed her the tablet. Rebecca scrolled through files, her expression hardening as she read. Protective custody. Biological preservation. They took samples from us. Her voice rose. We were research subjects? It appears so, Helen confirmed. We're still investigating the full extent of what was done. Rebecca stood up, wobbling slightly. A medic moved to help her but she waved them off. She walked to the nearest pod and looked at the face inside. David Patterson. He was a botanist. Had a wife and 2 kids back on Earth. She touched the pod gently. They're all dead now. His whole family. Dead for centuries. She moved to another pod. Catherine Lee. She was 19. Youngest person on the crew. She wanted to see new worlds. Rebecca's voice cracked. Instead she got frozen and forgotten in a basement. Jake stood up and approached slowly. Miss Hall? My name is Jake. I'm the one who found you. Rebecca looked at him properly for the first time. A janitor found us. After 300 years, it was a janitor. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. Not some grand rescue mission. Not the authorities investigating our disappearance. A janitor who noticed something odd in a garden. I'm sorry it took so long, Jake said, not knowing what else to say. Rebecca studied his face. Don't apologize. You cared enough to look. That's more than most people would have done. She turned back to Helen. We need to wake the others. They deserve to know. And we need to do it soon before someone decides to cover this up again. Agreed, Helen said. But we need to go slowly. 1 or 2 per day. Give each person time to adjust before we add more to the situation. Over the next 2 weeks, Jake visited the chamber every day after his shifts. He watched as one by one the colonists woke up. Each revival was different. Some people broke down immediately. Others went quiet and withdrawn. A few got angry, demanding answers from the Valerian officials who showed up to offer formal apologies. Rebecca Hall became their unofficial leader, helping each newly awakened person adjust. She was strong when they needed strength, gentle when they needed comfort. Jake found himself working with her, answering questions about the modern world, helping the colonists understand 3 centuries of changes. He showed them pictures of Earth, now home to 12 billion people. He explained about the hundreds of human colonies scattered across space. He told them about the technology, the medicine, the peace treaty with the Valorians that had held for 200 years. But he also told them the truth about what had been done to them. The tissue samples. The medical research. The fact that their genetic resistance to a particular disease had been studied and used to save millions of Valerian lives. They'd been tools. Resources to be used and stored. One evening, Jake found Rebecca sitting alone in the chamber, looking at the empty pods. Everyone had been successfully revived. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Justice," she said. "What does justice look like for something like this? The people who did this to us are dead. The government that approved it is long gone. The Valorians keep apologizing, but words don't give us back 300 years. What do you want?" Jake asked. Rebecca was quiet for a long moment. "I want to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Not to humans. Not to any species. I want first contact protocols that have teeth. Oversight that can't be ignored or forgotten." She looked at him. "I want our suffering to mean something." Jake nodded. "Then let's make it mean something. Let's make sure everyone in the galaxy knows what happened here." Rebecca smiled for the first time since waking up. It didn't reach her eyes yet, but it was a start. A janitor and a 300-year-old engineer. "Think we can change the galaxy?" "I think we have to try," Jake said. And in that moment, looking at the empty pods that had been prisons for so long, he believed it was possible. The news spread across human space like wildfire. Within 48 hours, every major media outlet was running the story. 127 colonists from the legendary lost ship New Horizon, found alive after 3 centuries. Kept in cryo-sleep by the Valorians. Forgotten in a sealed chamber beneath a diplomatic garden. Jake's face was suddenly everywhere. The janitor who stumbled onto the discovery of the century. He hated it. Reporters camped outside his quarters. His handheld never stopped buzzing with interview requests. He ignored them all and kept working, kept helping Rebecca and the others adjust to their new reality. The human government demanded a formal inquiry. The Valerian Council agreed immediately, falling over themselves to appear cooperative. Ambassador Velan was recalled to the Valerian homeworld for questioning. Before he left, he came to see Jake one last time. "I have been relieved of my position," Velan said. They stood in the garden where it all began, now trampled by investigators and news crews. "It is appropriate. I should have spoken sooner." "You kept them alive," Jake pointed out. "You made sure I could find them. Small actions to make up for great cowardice." Velan looked toward his former office. "There will be a tribunal. Many uncomfortable truths will emerge. Not just about your colonists, but about other species we have encountered over the centuries. The garden I planted had many seeds buried within it." Jake understood. "There are others. Other people taken and forgotten. Perhaps. Perhaps not. But the questions will be asked now, and that is what matters." Velan extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. "Thank you, Jake Mitchell, for having the courage I lacked." They shook hands and the old ambassador left. Jake never saw him again. The formal hearings began 3 weeks later. They were broadcast across the galactic network, translated into hundreds of languages. Jake sat in the gallery and watched as Valerian officials took the stand one by one, testifying about protocols and procedures from 3 centuries ago. But it was Rebecca who changed everything. She walked to the testimony platform wearing simple clothes, her hair still growing back from the cryo-sleep. Every camera in the chamber focused on her. She carried a data tablet and several physical documents printed on actual paper. "My name is Rebecca Hall," she began. "I was chief engineer on the colony ship New Horizon. On March 14, 2247, we encountered a Valerian patrol fleet. They told us we were entering restricted space. We apologized and prepared to change course. Instead, they boarded our ship." The chamber was absolutely silent as she spoke. Rebecca described the confusion, the fear, the way families had been separated. How over 100 of them had been told they were being taken for brief medical evaluation, and would rejoin the ship soon. "We trusted them," Rebecca said. "We were new to space. New to meeting alien species. We thought they were helping us." She held up the tablet. "Then I woke up 300 years later and found these files." She started reading. Medical logs detailing tissue samples taken while the colonists slept. Research notes about human immune responses. Breakthrough discoveries in Valerian medicine based on studying human genetic material. "We weren't protected," Rebecca said, her voice steady and cold. "We were harvested. Our bodies were used as research material for centuries while we slept, unable to consent, unable to refuse. And when the research was done, we weren't awakened. We were forgotten. Left to sleep forever in a chamber that was built over and sealed." She pulled out one of the paper documents. "This is a medical report from 2389. It describes how human genetic material taken from Subject 17, that's me, led to a vaccine that saved over 40 million Valerian lives during the Kresh Plague. Rebecca looked directly at the Valerian Council members seated at the high bench. 40 million lives saved using my body without my knowledge or permission. And no one thought to wake me up and say thank you. Or even tell my family that I wasn't dead. The chamber erupted. Journalists shouted questions. Council members called for order. But Rebecca wasn't finished. I want to be clear, she said, raising her voice. I'm glad those 40 million people survived. If someone had asked me if I'd had a choice, I would have helped willingly. Humans believe in helping others. We believe in cooperation between species. Her voice hardened. But we also believe in consent. In dignity. In being treated as people, not as resources to be exploited and stored. She held up more documents. After Mr. Mitchell found us, we gained access to the full research archives. What was done to us wasn't unique. We found references to similar programs involving 3 other species during their first contact periods. All of them listed as concluded or archived. We want to know what that means. We want to know if there are others still sleeping somewhere waiting to be found. The head of the Valerian Council, an elderly female named Sella, stood up. Miss Hall, on behalf of my people, I offer our deepest apologies. What was done to you and your fellow colonists was wrong. It violated the principles we claim to hold sacred. I don't want apologies, Rebecca said. I want action. I want every sealed facility searched. Every archive opened. If there are others, they need to be found and awakened. And I want new laws. Real laws with real enforcement. First contact protocols that treat emerging species as equals, not as subjects for study. Sella nodded slowly. You will have them. I give you my word. Forgive me, counselor, but your people's word is worth very little to me right now. Rebecca gestured to the other colonists sitting in the gallery. We've lost everything. Our families. Our time. Our futures. The only thing we have left is the chance to make sure this never happens again. Jake watched from his seat as Rebecca laid out her demands. Full disclosure of all first contact incidents. Independent oversight by multiple species, not just the Valorians. Reparations for the colonists. And most importantly, the creation of a new interstellar body dedicated to protecting the rights of emerging civilizations. Over the following days, Jake spent his time digging through the archives Rebecca had mentioned. He wasn't supposed to have access, but his maintenance credentials got him into data systems most people overlooked. What he found made his stomach turn. The 3 other species Rebecca had mentioned weren't archived. They were still in the database. Current status listings. Active monitoring. Someone somewhere was still checking on them. Jake found Rebecca in her temporary quarters. She was studying legal documents, trying to understand galactic law well enough to fight it. I found something, he said. Those other species you mentioned. I think some of them might still be in stasis. Rebecca's head snapped up. Show me. They spent the next 6 hours going through the files Jake had pulled. 3 species. The Kelrath, the Mivan, and the Tauren. All encountered during their early space exploration phases. All deemed unsuitable for contact by review boards. All placed in protective custody at various facilities across Valerian space. The last status update on any of them was dated 8 years ago. We need to tell the council, Rebecca said. They'll bury it, Jake argued. They'll say they need time to investigate. By the time they finish investigating, those files will have disappeared. Rebecca looked at him with something like admiration. You're not just a janitor, are you? You're a troublemaker. Jake grinned. I prefer to think of myself as someone who notices problems and fixes them. Good, Rebecca said. Because we're about to make a very big problem for some very powerful people. She copied all the files to multiple secure locations and sent them to every major news organization, human rights group, and diplomatic mission she could find. Then she walked back into the hearing chamber the next day and dropped the information like a bomb. The galaxy erupted in outrage. Demonstrations outside Valerian embassies on dozens of worlds. Calls for sanctions. Demands for immediate action. Within a week, the Valerian Council announced they were opening all facilities for inspection. Teams would search for any other species held in protective custody. Everything would be transparent. Everything would be documented. Jake stood with Rebecca in the garden again, watching ships come and go from the station. Think they'll actually do it? He asked. They don't have a choice now, Rebecca said. Too many people are watching. Too many questions being asked. She looked at him. You started this, you know. If you just filed your report and moved on, none of this would have happened. I'm a janitor, Jake said. We don't leave messes uncleaned. Rebecca laughed, a real laugh this time. The galaxy's about to learn what happens when you leave a mess where a stubborn janitor can find it. The inspections took 4 months. Teams made up of representatives from a dozen different species traveled to every known Valerian research facility, diplomatic outpost, and sealed archive. What they found exceeded everyone's worst fears. Jake watched the reports come in from his quarters on Harmony Point. The Kelrath were found first, 62 of them sleeping in a facility on a moon orbiting the Valerian homeworld. They'd been there for 180 years. Then the Mivan, 38 individuals kept in stasis on a research station. The Tauran were discovered last, 97 of them hidden in a decommissioned military base that hadn't appeared on any official records for decades. Each discovery brought new waves of outrage and grief. Each awakening meant more people trying to process centuries of stolen time. Rebecca threw herself into the work. She traveled to each facility as the aliens woke up, helping explain what had happened, offering support from someone who understood. Jake went with her when he could get time off, though his supervisor eventually just told him to take an extended leave. "You're part of this now," his boss said. "Might as well see it through." The first meeting between all the affected species happened on Harmony Point, in a conference hall that had been hastily prepared for the occasion. Rebecca represented the humans. A Kelrath named Voss spoke for his people, his scaled features unreadable to human eyes. The Mivan sent a representative called Chur, her feathers constantly shifting colors with emotion. The Tauran delegate was Karan, who communicated through a translation device since his species used frequencies humans couldn't hear. "We are united by what was taken from us," Rebecca said, standing at the head of the table. "Time. Choice. Dignity." The Valorians claimed they acted from benevolence, from a desire to protect us until we were ready for galactic society. She looked at each delegate in turn. "But nobody asked if we wanted protection. Nobody gave us a choice." Voss nodded, his head moving in a gesture that looked nothing like human agreement but meant the same thing. "My people have a saying. The hand that feeds you also holds your leash." The Valorians decided we were pets to be kept safe, not equals to be respected. "The question is what we do now," Chur said, her feathers flashing red and orange. "Anger is easy. Revenge would be satisfying. But neither gives us back what we lost." Jake sat in the back of the room watching. He wasn't part of the official proceedings, just an observer. But Rebecca had insisted he be there. "You started this," she'd said. "You should see where it goes." Karan's translation device crackled. "We must ensure this never happens to others. New species emerge into space travel every century. If the pattern continues, more will be taken, studied, forgotten." "Exactly," Rebecca said. She pulled up a document on the main screen. "That's why we're proposing the First Contact Accord. New regulations that apply to every spacefaring civilization. Rules with actual enforcement." She walked them through the proposal she'd been working on for months with legal experts and diplomats from multiple species. Independent observers present at all first contact situations. Transparent documentation. Strict limits on what information could be gathered from emerging civilizations. And most importantly, severe penalties for violations. "The Valorians will never agree to this," Voss said. "It removes too much of their control." "They don't have a choice," Jake spoke up from the back. Everyone turned to look at him. He felt his face flush but continued. "Sorry, I know I'm not supposed to speak. But the whole galaxy is watching now. Every news outlet, every government. The Valorians can't afford to refuse. It would prove everything we're saying about them." Rebecca smiled. "Jake's right. We have leverage now. Public opinion, moral authority, and the attention of every major power. The Valorians either accept real oversight or they lose their position as leaders of the galactic community." Over the next 3 weeks they refined the proposal. Each species added their own perspectives, their own requirements. The document grew from 20 pages to over 200, covering every aspect of first contact protocols. When they presented it to the Galactic Council, the chamber was packed. Jake stood with the other affected colonists in the gallery, watching as Rebecca and the other delegates made their case. The Valerian Council had changed since the scandal broke. Sela had resigned. 3 other members had been removed. The new leadership seemed genuinely committed to reform, though Jake remained skeptical. Apologies were easy. Change was hard. The vote took 2 days of debate. In the end, the First Contact Accord passed with overwhelming support. 43 civilizations signed it immediately. Others pledged to review and sign within the month. Jake found himself standing in the same garden where everything had started. The memorial construction crews had finished their work. Where vines had once hidden secrets, there now stood a monument. 127 names carved in stone, along with the names of the Kelrath, Mivan, and Torin who'd been found. Below them, a simple inscription: those who were taken, those who were forgotten, those who were found. Rebecca walked up beside him. They're asking me to head up the new First Contact Ethics Committee. Full-time position. Good pay. Chance to actually make a difference. You going to take it? Jake asked. Already accepted. Someone needs to make sure the rules we wrote actually get followed. She looked at him. They want you to. As an advisor. Someone with ground-level perspective, they said. Jake laughed. I'm a janitor. What do I know about galactic diplomacy? You know how to notice things other people miss. You know how to follow through when something seems wrong. And you know how to clean up messes, even really big ones. Rebecca gestured at the memorial. This whole thing started because you cared enough to investigate a weird door in a garden. The galaxy needs more people like that. Jake thought about it. His job was simple. Predictable. Safe. This new path would be complicated and probably frustrating. He'd be dealing with bureaucrats and politicians, paperwork and procedures. But he'd also be helping make sure no one else got frozen and forgotten in a basement somewhere. Okay, he said. I'm in. Over the following year, the First Contact Ethics Committee established offices on Harmony Point. They investigated reports, reviewed protocols, and monitored new contact situations. Jake traveled to a dozen worlds, helping train observers and establish guidelines. The 127 colonists from the New Horizons scattered across human space. Some returned to Earth to see how their home had changed. Others joined colonies on distant worlds. A few stayed on Harmony Point, working with the committee or simply trying to build new lives in a future they'd never expected to see. Jake kept his small quarters on the station. He still walked through the diplomatic wing sometimes, though he carried a tablet now instead of a mop. Rebecca's office was 3 floors above where the Valerian embassy had been. They met most mornings to review cases and plan initiatives. One morning, Jake received a message from an unfamiliar sender. When he opened it, he found a video file. The image showed Velan, the former Valerian ambassador, standing in what looked like a simple dwelling. He'd aged noticeably, his gray skin more wrinkled, his movements slower. Jake Mitchell, Velan said to the camera. I am told you accepted the position with the Ethics Committee. This pleases me greatly. I wanted you to know that my tribunal concluded 6 months ago. I was found guilty of criminal negligence for not reporting the sealed facility. My sentence was exile from Valerian diplomatic service and 5 years of community service. The old alien smiled slightly. I am currently working at a school, teaching young Valorians about the importance of speaking truth even when it is difficult. I tell them about a human janitor who found a door that others chose not to see. I tell them about courage and conscience. Perhaps some will listen. The message ended. Jake saved it to his personal files. That afternoon, he stood in the memorial garden with a watering can, tending the plants that grew around the monument. Humans and Valorians had planted them together. Earth flowers mixed with alien blooms, creating something new from the ashes of old mistakes. A group of school children came through on a tour, their teacher explaining the history. Jake listened as she told them about the New Horizon, about the people who were found, about the changes that followed. Was it really just a janitor who found them? One kid asked. The teacher smiled. Yes. A maintenance worker noticed something unusual and decided to investigate. It reminds us that anyone can make a difference if they pay attention and care enough to act. Jake kept watering the plants, smiling to himself. The kids moved on and the garden grew quiet again. He finished his work and stood back to admire the results. The flowers were thriving. The memorial looked peaceful. Above him, ships continued their endless dance, arriving and departing from Harmony Point. Each one carried people going about their lives, most of them never knowing about the secrets that had been buried beneath their feet. But the secrets were out now. The questions were being asked. And somewhere in the galaxy, new species were taking their first steps into space, protected now by rules that had been written in the aftermath of old wrongs. Jake packed up his watering can and headed back to his office. He had 3 new case files to review before the afternoon meeting. The work never stopped. But that was okay. Some messes took time to clean up properly. And Jake had learned he was patient enough to see the job done right.